You think you know who you are. A name, a personality, a job title, a list of things you're proud of. But Carl Jung would shake his head, because what you call you isn't you. It's a mask, a persona, a performance that hardened into identity. And until you strip it off, until you face what's hiding beneath, you will never meet your true self. Jung didn't believe self-discovery was comfortable. He believed it was war. Not against the world, but against the image you've been protecting your whole life. The image you built to be loved, to be accepted, to be safe. Most people would rather be liked than real, consistent than free, polished than whole. But you're still listening, which means something in you is done with the mask. Something in you is hungry, not for motivation, not for information, but for yourself, the one you lost, the one you buried, the one you silenced with questions like, what will they think? What if I'm wrong? What if I'm too much? This is not a conversation. This is a confrontation. You're about to meet the parts of yourself you've been running from. The bones you buried as a child. The patterns you learned to keep others comfortable. The rebellion that sparks in your chest every time you pretend. This is individuation. This is becoming. Let's begin. Jung didn't see the self as something you find. He saw it as something you become. Not by polishing the mask, but by integrating the fragments. You don't discover yourself with quizzes, passions, or vision boards. You find yourself by turning inward, into the dark, into the chaos, into the shadow. And the shadow is everything, everything you repressed, everything you deemed unacceptable, the anger you swallowed, the selfishness you denied, the desires you buried, the truths you weren't allowed to say. Piece by piece, that pile grew, and to survive, you split. One side became the persona, polite, agreeable, predictable, safe, the version of you that was allowed to exist. The other side, your shadow, was locked away. The persona helped you fit in. It won you praise. It kept you loved, but it cost you everything. Because the longer you wore the mask, the more you forgot what you were hiding, until eventually you confused the mask with your face and the world. It only knows the edited version of you. But here's the truth. You will never become whole by perfecting the mask. You only become whole by integrating the shadow. Jung warned, until you make the unconscious conscious. It will direct your life, and you will call it fate. Read that again. You're not in control. Your persona reacts. Your shadow drives. And until you face it, you are a puppet of your own avoidance. So ask yourself, what have you repressed? Not what you dislike. What you fear others would dislike. What traits were you punished for, mocked for, shamed for? Too loud, too quiet, too sensitive, too ambitious, too intense, too sexual, too angry, too withdrawn, too honest. So you edited yourself, piece by piece, until you weren't whole anymore. You didn't just lose traits, you lost instincts, you lost edge, you lost truth, and the result, you became predictable, stable, palatable, but never free. That's why you're stuck, achieving, performing, maintaining, but empty. Not because you're broken, but because you've been living as half a person. Jung saw it everywhere. People who called themselves good, but lived resentful. People who looked calm, but boiled inside. People who gave endlessly, but felt invisible. Because until you face your shadow, you were only an echo of who you could be. People who had followers, but no identity. People who succeeded but didn't know why they still fell fallow. Because if you build a life from the persona, you lose access to Thassel. Let that sink in. This is why self-help never works, Beckers. It's usual opportunized. Improve yourself. Polished mask. Upgrade your image. But what you need isn't improvement. It's integration. You need to go down into shadow, into the basement, into the pain. Not to get lost in it, but to retrieve what's yours. Your fire, your instincts, your clarity, your rage, your desire, yourself. And that's the step most people will never take because it doesn't feel safe. It feels like death, and in a way, itis. Because the persona must not all at once, but layer by. It has to be challenged, questioned, dismantled. You have to catch yourself in real time. Every time you say yes when you mean no. Every time you smile to make someone else comfortable. Every time you apologize for being clear. Every time you will censor your voice just to be liked. That's not kindness, that's self-eraser. And the only way to stop it is to become so aware of your shadow, so in touch with your inner opposites that you can choose their wholeness over your habit. That's individuation. It's not becoming better, it's becoming complete. Let me be clear. This will cost you. You will lose relationships. You will disappoint people who loved your mask. You will break habits thatest to numb you. You will feel guilt for, finally, choose and yourself. But you will also breathe deeply, for the first time in years, because no amount of acceptance is worth the price of self-abandonment. And Jung knew this. He knew the price of truth was loneliness, but the reward, freedom. When you stop living for external validation, your clarity beckons. People don't like it, because Ethy can't control you anymore. You no longer need approval. You no longer chase attention. You no longer bend to keep the peace. You choose peace with Innovan, if it causes war without thatest shift. You stop asking how do I look and start asking does this lean. You stop asking will they like me and start asking is this real. You stop asking am I good and start asking am I true. And truth is not always nice. Truth is sharp. Truth is silent. Truth is messy. But truth is you. And here's the secret. The more truth you integrate, the less control the world has over you. You no longer fold under pressure. You no longer collapse under judgment. You no longer pretend to be smaller, sweeter, simpler than. You are. You walk with all of you, shadow included, and people feel it. They may not understand it, but they feel it. You become someone they can't figure out, can't manipulate, can't label. You become someone who mirrors their own avoidance, and that's your power. Not to be loved, but to be whole. That's what this is all about. No optimization, not perfection, wholeness. You're not here to be liked. You're here to be undeniably you. And no. We'll go deeper into the specific behaviors that keep you split. Why you attract, what wounds you, how emotional obedience is mistaken for maturity, and the provid exact process Jung laid out to begin the path toward real individuation. You saw what you've been, living as no to yourself, but a fraction. A version of few that was sculpted for survival. A well-practiced mask built from approval, applause, and the quiet terror of buying too much. And now you've begun to feel what Jung called the pull of the shadow. That internal tension, the emotion between who you are and who you're pretending to be, the tug-of-war between truth and image. If that tension has started to burn, good. That's the first proof you're alive again. Because at the moment you see your persona as a costume, you start to notice how tight it fits. How tired you are of holding the pose. how exhausted you feel after reverie. Yes, that wasn't cruel, but before you can become your true self, you have to understand the thee system that keeps the false one alive. Because your behavior isn't random. Your patterns aren't personal quirks. They're reflexes of a fragmented self. And Jung taught that unless you learn to identify the traps keeping you split, you will forever live as a puppeteer forming peace while quietly self-destructing. Let's expose those traps. The first is emotional obedience. This is the belief that being good means being agreeable, that kindness equals compliance, that maturity means softness, patience, and tolerance even when your boundary is being crossed. You've been told that reacting is mature, that anger is toxic, that saying no is confrontational, that wanting space is rude, so you do that old thing. You shrink, you nod, you soothe, you please. But Jung would ask, at what cost? Because this emotional obedience isn't mission. It's the shadow of fear, wearing the mask of virtue. And if you never learn to differentiate inness from compliance, you will live your life of permanent apology. Jung called this the over-identification with the persona. It's when you become so afraid of your darker instincts, your sharpness, your honesty, your anger that you exile them. And once they're exiled, they don't disappear. They leak through passive aggression, through people-pleasing, through exhaustion, through identity. So how do you break this? You stop confusing emotional comfort with integrity. You stop calling your silence wisdom. You start letting people feel disappointed, uncomfortable, even threatened, not because you're cruel, but because you're clear. This is where individuation begins, target real. You stop dressing up your boundaries as kindness. You stop softening your truth to protect their ego. You stop negotiating your worth for temporary peace. And yes, people will push back because they've grown. Addicted to your obedience. They've built a version of you that exists to them, and when you break character, they won't know how to love the real you. But that's the price of liberation. You either live as a fantasy or you risk being fully known. Most won't choose that risk, but you will because you stay in emotional obedience, the more resentful you become. You become bitter at the people who use you, not realizing you taught them to. You become exhausted by the roles you've outgrown, but keep repeating. You become invisible even to yourself. So stop explaining your no. Stop translating your truth. Stop apologizing for existing. That's trap 1. Emotional obedience. Now let's move to the second trap. And it's far more deceptive. Attraction to the familiar wound. Jung believed that until the shadow is integrated, it doesn't just distort your behavior, it distorts your. You don't attract what you want. You attract what you haven't filled. That's why you keep ending up with people who mirror your past. People will reinforce your early wounds. People will don't see you, respect you, or truly use you, but feel magnetic anyway. That magnetism, that's not chemistry. That is subconscious seeking resolution. It's the wounded inner child trying to recreate the pain that shaped them so they can finally fix it. You call it love. Jung calls it projection. You say, I'm just drawn. To them, he'd say, you're trying to finish an old story. You chase the unavailable, the critical, the emotionally inconsistent, not because you're broken, but because your psyche is trying to complete the script you couldn't complete in childhood. But here's the problem. You didn't heal in the same environment. That wounded you, you just repeat it. And the very time you do, your shadow grows deeper. You feel more unlovable, more confused, more unsure of who you are one, No one is watching. That's why individuation demands withdrawal, not forever, but long enough to break the cycle. Long enough to stop chasing connection through the wound. Long enough to realize that your wellness doesn't live in someone else's psalms. It lives in your willingness to stand alone. That's when you begin to rewire attraction. You stop chasing intensity. You start choosing safety. You stop craving approval. You start respecting your own standards. You stop asking, will Tessa? You start asking, do I stay with myself? When they enter the room, that's their new frame. Now, let's go deeper. Trap 3, the addiction to certainty. Jung believed that the ego's primary job is to maintain order, predictability, consistency. So, when you start to change, when you start to shed the persona, the ego panics. It screams. It fills your mind with doubt, fear, stories of failure. Not because the shadow is dangerous, but because it's unknown, and the ego would rather stay in misery that it understands than freedom that it doesn't. So what do? You sabotage. You procrastinate. You delay your truth. You wait until you feel ready. But here's the thing, you'll never feel ready. You need more time. You need more decisions. You need to move without a mission, to speak without suburping, to act without suburchisting, because individuation does wait for perfect timing. It demands leaps into the awkward, into the uncertain, into the what will they think. And that leap, that's the birthplace of identity. That's where you start becoming. Not when it's safe, but when it's real. Let's name trap 4. This only hides in plain sight. The addiction to self-improvement. This is the cycle of endless fixing, endless healing, endless searching forth next level. You read, you journal, you reflect, you optimize, and yet nothing truly changes. Why? Because self-improvement has become new persona. It feels deep. Beauty's just another mask. You're still trying to earn your worth, just in a more spiritual costume. You're still trying to escape your shadow by analyzing it instead of integrating it. Jung would say, stop studying yourself, start facing yourself. That means less reading, more revealing, less talking, more redoing. You don't need more clarity, you need more confrontation. Start doing the thing you've been avoiding. That's your real growth. Because the true self doesn't emerge through planning. It emerges through pressure. One real no spoken aloud. One real boundary enforced. One real silence kept instead of forming. That's where the math cracks. That's when the shadow softens. That's when you meet. And now we arrive at the final trap. And it's the most seductive, the myth of the good person. You were taught to be good, to be nice, to be agreeable, to be liked, and you built your entire self around that identity. But Jung would say being good isn't the goal, being wholess, because your obsession with buying good is just fear of rejection in disguise. You don't want to hurt people. That's noble. But sometimes the truth hurts. Sometimes the truth disappoints. Sometimes your boundary breaks. They're elusive. And if your identity can't survive, that it's not real. So now, you choose, good or whole, nice or true, obedient or you. And when you choose wellness, here's what happens. You stop negotiating with yourself. You stop waiting for permission. You stop bending for approval. And in that space, that uncomfortable raw space, the real self starts to emerge. It's quiet at first. Then it gets louder. It starts choosing differently, speaking more clearly, feeling less guilt. And one day, you'll look around and realize you're no longer pretending. You're no longer performing. You're no longer seeking. You're being. That's the work. That's individuation. Not a transformation into something new, but a return to something instant. You unfiltered, unfolding, undeniable. If you've come this far, you've already done what most never will. You've stared into the mask. Yahweh, the shadow you carry, and the lycée you built your identity on. You've walked through the discomfort of realizing that the person you've been wasn't truly you. Just a compromise, a survival instinct wrapped in praise, silence, and emotional obedience. You've begun the processing called individuation. So, here's how this ends. You no longer chase clarity, you embody it. You no longer ask for permission, you exist anyway. You no longer perform for acceptance, you define it. You no longer fear your darkness, you integrate it. From this moment on, your job is simple. Protect your peace like it's Ali. Speak your truth like it's oxygen. Move through the world like it's already yours. Let the mask burn. Let the shadow breathe, and let the real you, the one woe, doesn't flinch, doesn't beg, doesn't explain. Walk through the fire and touch. That is who you've always been. Welcome back. Thanks for listening and watching. Please like, share, and subscribe.